Welcome to a Passamaquoddy Lodge Talk. This Lodge Talk with Paul Williams, negotiator. Lodge Talk is talking treaties this time with someone who knows, Paul Williams. Paul, there are a lot of treaties that you cite. Can you start with the earliest ones, and what is the basis of the Passamaquoddy treaty relationship with the Crown?
1725, the Peskotomuhkati are the first of the four Wabanaki nations to negotiate a treaty relationship with the Crown. And I want to be careful to say treaty relationship rather than treaty, because it's the relationship that counts. And the relationship gets renewed explicitly in 1749, explicitly with an adjustment in 1752 for changing times, again in 1760 after the defeat of the French, and expanded in its scope under the Imperial Indian Department in 1766, so that each of these transactions is distinct, but each of them is about the same relationship.
Now, I have a hard time tracing my lineage back a couple of generations. How do you know what happened so long ago?
We're really lucky. We're lucky that so many of the historic documents were kept. So the documentary record is one part. The second part is there's a powerful oral tradition, and it is made more powerful by the fact that the people really have not had a lengthy heritage of using books, so they worked harder on their memories. And
well, as our ancestors did in memorizing the Iliad or the Odyssey or the liturgy, we did that as well.
Very much so. And in fact, the Iliad is a very good example, because as a story that everybody knew in Western Europe, in Western militaries, the Iliad really set the rules of war for 2,000 years. The memory of the meaningfulness of the treaty relationship, it means we move into talking about principles rather than details, but the principles are pretty clear. And the fundamental principle is this is a family-like relationship. We look after each other.
Now, if those treaties exist and the documentary evidence is there, then what is the current problem? Why are these protracted negotiations?
In the 1920s and 30s, there were a string of Canadian court cases that cast doubt on whether the treaties were valid or the chiefs had any authority or ability to carry out treaties. It wasn't until 1985 that the Mi'kmaq were able to establish that, yes, indeed, their 1752 treaty had validity. It wasn't until 1999 that the Donald Marshall case in the Supreme Court of Canada established fishing rights under the same sequence of treaties. And it wasn't until 2016 that the Government of Canada said the Peskotomuhkati people, even though the Supreme Court of Canada had said so 16, 17 years before, it wasn't until 2016 that the Government of Canada came around to recognizing the treaty relationship there. And then to put the icing on the cake, because we're talking about one nation with a river running through it, separating what's now the United States from Canada. It wasn't until May 2nd, 2019 that the British Columbia Court of Appeals said that an Indigenous nation with people on both sides of the line, the people on the American side are also an Aboriginal people of Canada because their land is in Canada. And that applies in spades to treaty rights. So the law in Canada is evolving.
Sounds like normal life in a family where people misremember or forget or lose things or purposefully obfuscate, and it's all got to be sorted out, right?
There are dysfunctional families, and there are counselors, and it takes time. It's complicated.
Now, as we say in the Maritimes, where are we at now with sorting this out?
It's taking time. We want to do it right. We're on the verge of signing a framework agreement that will basically put us into a position of having long-term conversations about what does this stuff mean in the 21st century? What will it continue to mean? That's one side. The other side is we're recognizing this is going to take years. During that time, what do we do in the interim? How do we move to create a viable, sustainable food fishery? How do we move toward a commercial fishery? How do we, a tough conversation, an ongoing one is, okay, the people on the American side of the river have treaty rights. Canada has never adjusted to that before. Now what do we do? It's a conversation we can have now.
Can we think of this like the North American Free Trade Agreement, where we have a deal, it codifies all sorts of behaviors, but there are still disputes and there's still a dispute resolution mechanism?
In fact, the treaties don't contain a dispute resolution mechanism. They contain what we call a concern resolution mechanism. That is, we will not allow things to become disputes. When a matter is raised as a concern, it is an obligation of the party that's notified to pay serious attention to it. And again, that's recent Canadian law. It's 2006 that the Supreme Court of Canada first said there are procedural treaty rights and the right to have concerns addressed before they become disputes has been recognized in Canada for 12 years. How do we give it real meaning? That's where we are now.
What are the things that citizens of the nation can be really sure and firmly convinced that their treaties empower them with or protect for them?
You're talking all the citizens of the nation, both sides of the river?
Yes.
Really sure? Nothing. Probably the right to hunt and fish. Much less probably the right to be in the country in order to carry out the treaty right in the first place. Not much else.
But those early treaties that you cited don't have specific language in them awarding or recognizing land. I'm choosing my words carefully, but recognizing rights and land and language and culture?
Oddly, land-wise, no. Land surrenders. The giving up of Aboriginal title to land in Canada really starts in the 1780s. And these are 1720s. These are people who had been fighting and who now made peace. And all they agreed was, we will follow our way of life, you follow your way of life, we'll respect each other, we won't interfere with each other. But there's no land surrender here. It's not like the Western treaties. It's not like post-1867 treaties. These aren't real estate deals. So how do we deal with land? Especially now that the Crown in New Brunswick has acted like it's owned everything for a couple of centuries. How do we deal with that? It's a new conversation. And if we are smart and lucky, we invent new ways of holding land.
What's your advice for the average viewer of this who says, well, I want to do something. I want to do something positive. I might be a neighbor, a citizen, a friend, someone who knows nothing about any of this. What do I do?
For one thing, become aware of the issues. For another, think about how do we do stuff together, the things we agree on, the things we consider mutually urgent. You can do something about that. Another thing you can do is attend public meetings, get a positive perspective across to members of the legislature. New Brunswick's a small province. To members of parliament. The other side of it is don't be afraid to approach the council or the chief or go to the office. Find out what's going on and say, because that's the treaty relationship, say, how can I help? This coming fall, for example, we're looking for someone to help butcher the moose. The moose gets distributed to the people who are in need. It's not a piece of hunting opportunism, but our butcher just moved out of province.
If I didn't think I'd lose a couple of fingers, I would come and help. But the best I can do is put up all those numbers and email addresses and street addresses at the end of this discussion for people to get involved. Maybe a butcher.
It all works.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any views expressed in this Lodge Talk don't necessarily reflect the views of any citizens of the Passamaquoddy Nation, its employees, friends, or neighbors. The object is stimulating conversation. Please go to the web, social media, email, or the telephone to join in the Lodge Talk.